It's time now to take a look at the international newspapers with Elena. Hello again, Elena. Starting with coverage of the Davos summit that's it's day 2 now, isn't it, in Switzerland?
Yes, now Angela Merkel has given an interview to 5 different European newspapers around the world. Of course, she opened the Davos summit yesterday, and we're looking forward to another Euro summit in Brussels on Monday, which is meant to be hammering out the details of the fiscal union pact that they agreed before Christmas. So she's given a joint interview to El País, La Stampa, Le Monde, The Guardian and the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Now, rather interestingly, they've all got completely different takes on an interview that was conducted by 5 of their journalists in the same room together. So it just goes to show, in some ways, how much division there still is in Europe. Now, she didn't say anything massively controversial in it. She said that Europe should still be pushing forward towards a political union eventually, that the European Court of Justice should get the power to crack down on countries, or rather penalise countries who overspend, go beyond their budget limits. But The Guardian and indeed some of the German papers have jumped on one quote she said when she said that Greece would not be bailed out at any possible price. So there's the Guardian front page there. Merkel casts doubt on hope of saving Greece from meltdown. Of course, that's a good thing if you're one of the German papers. The Süddeutsche Zeitung has headlined on that, saying they're glad that Merkel has finally drawn a red line in the sand, saying there's a limit beyond which Greece won't be endlessly bailed out and beyond which Germany won't keep spending money. But then, for some of the Eurozone periphery countries who could fall foul of that kind of limit, it's not a good thing at all. Here on the front page of El País, they've headlined it with "Youth unemployment in Spain is partly to do with Spanish legislation." They headlined on a quote in which Merkel appears to say in that interview that high unemployment in Spain is partly the country's own fault and not to do necessarily just with the Eurozone crisis and global recession. She criticised legislation in Spain which makes it difficult to hire young people, and that's enough for El País to attack her as a kind of iron lady, imposing tough, harsh austerity policy on other countries without understanding how their economies work.
And these papers, then, they're not very optimistic about the future of Europe.
Well, El País's editorial isn't especially. They've headlined it the State of the Union, but of course they're talking about the European Union in there. They say that it's lost all legitimacy, really, that we should be reconstructing it from the bottom up, because now that democracy has been replaced by technocracy in places like Greece and Italy, in order to get citizens back and having faith in the Union again, we need to redesign it. But of course they're writing for a Spanish public which still, in a huge majority, supports the idea of the European Union. If we look at The Guardian in Britain, which is trying to, if you like, sell the idea of the Union again to a public that's become incredibly Eurosceptic, they're publishing an editorial today trying to find a cause for hope in these dark days. Basically, they're trying to find reasons to get British readers to support Europe, and they do point out that the EU has done a lot of good things for environmental regulation, for humanitarian projects around the world, and they say that the euro and the European social model can still survive into the later 21st century.
And the papers are also looking at how Europeans view each other.
Yes, there's an interesting piece in The Guardian on how EU leaders are seen by their fellow Europeans. We've got those caricatures of Cameron and Sarkozy there. So on the left hand, you've got what the French think of Cameron. There's a Le Monde journalist who says
he's missing half a face.
He is missing half a face, rather, there. They say at the bottom that the French initially welcomed Cameron, thinking he was more of a Tory moderate on things like Europe. Of course, he's turned out to be more hardline than Thatcher as far as they see him. And they say he epitomises the British stereotype of an elite only wanting to socialise with one another and ignoring other people, whereas on the other side you've got Sarkozy there, and what some British journalists think of him. They say the one thing that most of the British public remember about him is that he wears stacked heels and of course is married to Carla Bruni, and they say British diplomats say that his impulsiveness makes him very difficult to work with. And over in El País, they're having a look at some of the stereotypes that we have about our ordinary fellow citizens. Apparently, polls reveal that lots of Europeans do still think that the Spanish are lazy, that the Germans have no sense of humour, that Brits are very nostalgic and think all the time about their past glories, that the Italians run away from danger, as perhaps epitomised by the captain of the Costa Concordia, the paper suggests, and finally that the French are incredibly vain.
And briefly, today is Australia Day.
It is, but Julia Gillard perhaps not celebrating with too much, the Sydney Morning Herald says. This morning she had to be rushed out of a restaurant in Canberra after it was besieged by Aboriginal protesters. Now, they're angry because they say the role of Aborigines in Australia's history still isn't being properly recognised. Apparently there's still elements in the Australian constitution that allow states to discriminate against Aborigines, and Gillard only just this last weekend suggested a referendum to get rid of those, but the Aboriginal rights groups say they've still not gone far enough.
Not a very happy Australia Day then for the Australian Prime Minister. Thank you very much for that look at the international press, Elena.